Never miss. Lessons learned from 45 years of running without missing a day is one amazing story about Mark Covert, a man who ran every day until 2013. I sat down one-on-one with one of the authors of the book and his son, Christopher Covert, for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores.
Chris Covert.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
I know you're around town busy with your consulting business and whatnot, and obviously you're involved with politics as well.
Yeah.
What are you up to these days?
Oh, jeez. What am I not? So, I mean, I have, there's a lot of different things that I do, obviously, and so, like, to start with politics, like you said, which I've done, the majority of the stuff in South Carolina has been that. Like, I'm working with two great candidates now, with Ben Poe, who's running in 110, which is here in Charleston, and over in Mount Pleasant, and then with Constance Nastapula, who's running for Attorney General. Right. Two great candidates, and I think we have great chances. But you know, until I tell everybody, you know, until Labor Day starts, you really don't know where you are. But they're both in great position. I think, you know, everybody who's on the Democratic side has a great chance this this fall. But you never know. You know, campaigns are strange things, and you just try to go about it the best you can. So, but I feel good about where we are with them. They're both really great people to work with, and good teams, and so I feel really good about that. I was doing some campaigns kind of across the country. I had some in North Carolina, some in Texas I was doing a little bit with, and still do some stuff in sports, but when I get to this point in the year, that's pretty hard, you know, to kind of balance your time. And I've been writing, you know, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So I mean, it's nice to not have one thing. It's overwhelming at times, so that's why at least trying to learning to balance it all is a good thing, you know.
And you talk about sports and writing. I got to talk to you about something that is near to your heart as well as mine, running.
Yeah.
You are a part of a huge book coming out soon called About Never Miss.
Yeah, yeah.
What am I missing about your story, your family story?
So my father held the America's longest running streak between 1968 and 2013. He ran every day for 45 years, didn't miss a day. All my brothers and sisters, and I have one brother and two sisters, we were all involved in athletics. I was the one that was more involved, like in running out of all of us. I ended up running for him in junior college. And I also went to Cal State Fullerton, where I got a degree in sports studies and studied under Ken Ravizza, who was pretty much like he was the person and the professor that really kind of founded what we know as sports psychology now. Then I ended up getting a master's degree in that, and ended up in politics somehow. That's another interview. So I did that, but you know, when the streak ended, you know, he had this conversation for a couple of years about wanting to put something down together about the story. And you know, I was just getting off the Bernie campaign in 2016, and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do still. I told him, you know, I kind of have the time now to do this. And you know, we started in the summer of 2016, so it's taken, you know, 2 years, a little bit more, and you know, really just it's this combination of the stories that kind of help get him from day to day in the streak, and combined with like the lessons that he learned. And I was lucky enough to kind of be the one that was asked, like, okay, you tell the story and I'll put it together. It was much harder than what I thought. You know, my wife laughs at me all the time. She's written a book, obviously, here at college, and it took her 7 years to write hers. And I said, oh, when I go, I think I should have this done in 3 or 4 months. I'll just interview them and no problem. And, you know, after 3 months of one chapter, you know what I mean? You're just kind of like, you know, she was like, oh, that's not going to happen now. So, but she's been extremely supportive in this. It's not easy being the spouse of a writer either way, because really, for myself, it was trying to find time in between everything else I could do, right? And you had to interview him and stuff like that, and we had to do the research. So it's been a fun journey, and it'll be coming out in October, and we're really excited about it. Yeah.
I kind of read a little bit of the introduction to it. About Never Miss. On July 23rd of 2013, Mark Covert ran at least a 1 mile a day for 45 years. Went for his last run. This 1 mile run across the campus of Antelope Valley College was the last Covert would take it in journey that had covered 16,436 consecutive days,
Yeah.
over 163,000 miles, the terms of 9 U.S. presidents, his marriage, the birth of his 4 children, and death of his parents. No one in America had at this point run more days without missing. Can I go back to July 23rd of that particular day, 2013? How did your dad's day start on that day?
Well, I wasn't there. I was actually traveling across from Mexico to South Carolina because my wife was doing research. So I wasn't there, but I had been there for obviously a lot of the other ones.
Yeah.
But the streak kind of came to an end pretty much because well, first of all, I always wanted to end it the way that he wanted to end it. At the very end of the streak, he has what was called, well, there were a couple things. About 4 or 5 years before that, oh no, actually maybe 10 years before the streak ended, he was on a run and he fell. And the next day it kind of felt a little bit weird, and they determined that he had torn his meniscus. So they said, you could run on it for a couple of years, but we're really not sure. You probably should get surgery.
Right.
So once he made the decision to get surgery, he decided that he was going to go on his run in the morning, get surgery at 9 o'clock, then the next morning go run again, which he did. And I was lucky enough to be there that next morning where it was like, okay, we're going out.
Right.
And we went out to the desert where we lived at that time. And, he had the cast on. He goes, okay, here we go. And, he got it in. It was a hobble, but he got the run in. That was kind of the first sign that, like, obviously time was catching up to him a little bit. Then he had some kidney stones about a year or two before that kept him in the hospital for a little bit. And the doctor allowed him to go down to a floor that was empty. And my brother would hold the IV bag, and he would run. And he ran a mile in the hospital, and it got to the point to where, like, his foot, so he has flat feet, and he had total mid-foot collapse. So really his foot was kind of turning, so if I'm looking at the camera, most feet, I guess, would go straight like this. His kind of turned like that way now. And it can't move. So when you push off the ground, obviously your foot can plantar flex, dorsiflex. It can't move.
Right.
So it was really kind of like a drag on the end, and he was falling a lot, pretty bad a couple of times. And the last run really was just kind of he has told me that when the streak was over, and this is in the book, but he told me that when it was over, it was more of a relief than anything else because it had become a chore at that point. So much of his career was spent around training, right? He was a national champion in cross country. He was on one of the great national championship teams in 1970 at Cal State Fullerton when they won the national championship. And he's just someone who always liked to challenge himself. And that had kind of stopped. And that last day, I think, for him was just a relief that it was somewhat over. But he started riding his bike a little bit before that, so now he did a century like a year later. He just enjoys to train, and that once that training aspect stopped, it was the thing that kind of had to shut it down. But there were so many other steps that got there. That last day was a culmination of so many things. But for him, again, I wasn't able to see it, but from what I know, it was a good time for it to come to an end. 16,000 plus days in a row to do anything is a long time. Yeah.
What kept him going in his mind?
What was the reason that he kept going? I mean, I think more so was that, like, so how the streak really began was, I'll go back to the beginning. It kind of started as an accident. He looked at his book that he trained in, and you'll see pictures in the book that we have of the journal, and it's about that big, and it's every run. And I think if I'm right, he had gotten to about 100 days. And he was in high school. Right. And he was like, well, I wonder if I can get to a year. That was the first thing. And then the next goal was like, well, I got to a year, I wonder if I can get to 5. Then the next goal was like, well, I wonder if I can get to 10. And then at that point, it had just become a part of his life, and he was training. And I also think one of the things that's important that kind of makes this book easy for people that are not athletes to understand, and that can be helpful to them as well, is that I think that we all deserve a time in our life throughout our day in which we can do something that's just for ourselves, right? Whether it's 15 minutes of reading, people use the Breathe app for a minute on their iWatch, which I forgot because I'm like, that's how busy my life is at this point. But taking a minute to do that, to doing something for himself. And he always ran early in the morning. So it was either he would run before practice would start with us at 6 a.m., so he'd run at 5. Or he'd run with us at 6 when we have practice and when his other teams had practice. So it wasn't something that was like, well, I'm in the middle of my day now, I've got to go work out. It was something that he got done before, which was a time just to himself. And I think, what was able to keep him going, number one is that I think it just made him feel better. The fact that he was able to accomplish something every day. There's this phrase in this book that came out a couple months ago that's called Make Your Bed, which you might have read about. And the whole goal is about you start your day off by accomplishing something, so you make your bed first, right? So for him, he felt he accomplished something every day, right? And did something that was just for him, right? When you're dealing with work and when you're dealing with stress, it's not a bad thing to take a half an hour sometimes, or 10 minutes, or an hour to just do something just for you. And I think that's one of the many things, right? And the second thing that I would say is that, I think we all, and to some extent, and some of it's in different areas, yourself with what you do here, right? There's an enjoyment from challenging yourself, right? There's an enjoyment from like, okay, I want to see like what I can do here, right? And I think for him, that was the other part of this. And that's part of the reason why I think the streak came to an end, was that there, he always made the joke about at the end that, in the beginning of the streak, he'd run past a tree and the leaves would fall, but now he could run past the tree and he would go so slow that he could see the leaf leave the tree and go down and hit the bottom, because that's how slow he was going. That's a joke that he always made. And, but for him, that challenge was not there anymore. He couldn't push himself as much as he could. And, he always was like, okay, what can I do? What can I do today, right? Can today be better than the next day? And that's a great question, I think, for everybody, right? Can today be better than the next day? What can we do that might be just a little bit more to push ourselves, right? And it has so much to do with, are we willing to be uncomfortable? And how uncomfortable are we willing to make ourselves, right? And I think that now, more than ever, we need to understand that great things are accomplished by how much we can challenge ourselves. If we're able to stay comfortable, you're not really going to accomplish much. And that's something that I tell candidates when you're on the road campaigning and you're tired. That's something that I tell, athletes I've worked with and people that I'm on a campaign with. We have a campaign that I'm on right now. So many of the people that we're working with on both Ben and Constance's campaign, this is somewhat new to them. And the idea of like, wait a minute, like it's 9 or 10. I've still got to keep working until, I've worked 12 hours. There's still more work that's got to be done. Be like, yeah, that's just how this works. You can't accomplish anything great until you challenge it yourself and you see how far you can go. And that's why I think he did it. He wanted to see what he could do. He wanted to test himself. And so that with the combination of having the opportunity to do something just for himself every day, I think that's a great reason to do something every day. And I think that idea of consistency was really something that stuck with him for a long time.
And besides money, what other challenges did your father have in those particular years?
Oh man, so I think the best one I can tell you. So in the 80s, he didn't become a full-time track and field coach until 1990. So that was 17 years of part-time work. So in the 80s, he became a traveling salesman. Was on the road 150 days a year during the time where myself and my brothers and sisters were all little babies. And one of the things that he had to do during that time, he worked for a group that was out of Japan, and they had this thing called the centers. And in Japan, what they did was that they had to have, there was a law that was created in the 80s that said that you needed to have other escape routes from skyscrapers, just in case there's a fire to escape. And what this company did is they came up with a piece of steel that was a 1/4 inch thick. It could go 3 feet per second, and you'd lock it onto your waist and you jump out a window. Didn't matter how high. Well, they wanted to come in the United States and try to sell the same thing. So he went on the road for 150 days a year and would go and give demonstrations where he'd be jumping out of buildings for a year. He did a couple 20-story jumps. He would go around and present to members of Congress. He would go around a lot of places. Up here on the neck, I know they have the training area. He would go to a lot of those training areas and demonstrate for fire departments. And he did that for a year. So I think, and again, the street gave him a break, right? Get up in the morning and get my run in. I got something to myself. I'm not always focusing on work, right? That's just such a great thing at that point, I think, for someone to do. So that's just one of the many things that he did during the time that just wasn't about keeping the streak alive. He learned things from the streak that he could implement into his life. And that's something that we're trying to do in the book too. It's kind of show everybody, the book is centered around a running story, but it's not just about obviously running. So we're pretty excited about it.
That's good to hear. And you also said this book, however, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
is not a summary of his runs or the many championships that he's won as an athlete and coach. It's a story of lessons he learned and knowledge he gained through his remarkable journey with the goal of helping readers implement those lessons in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
Starting with the lessons he learned from his parents.
Yeah.
Talk to me about his parents.
Oh God, my grandparents were, his parents were from Iowa, and then ended up moving to Chicago. A little bit outside Chicago in a town called Aurora.
Right.
And he ended up going to, my grandfather ended up going to World War II and fought in Palau. He received the Purple Heart for Palau. That was one of the war's deadliest battles in the Pacific. Came back and then he became a butcher. And he worked in, and this is different than what we kind of see with butchers now.
Right.
I mean, they bring in slabs and he would chop it up. And he really kind of learned, I think my grandfather never missed a day of work. My grandmother stayed at home, never learned how to drive.
Wow.
But never learned how to drive, right? Around here it'd be fine, like nothing, it'd be fine. But she never learned how to drive. But she was always there, always around. Never, even when she was sick, things would get done.
Right.
My grandfather would get stitched up and cut up all the time, and never would miss a day. Never missed a day of work. Sick, never would miss a day. Hurt, never would miss a day. There was never an excuse. And he was, it all started, I think, with the idea of toughness kind of came from them, because we all have a different definition of what toughness is, right? My definition of toughness is, sometimes it's getting up at 6:30 in the morning after working all, hours of the evening. That's tough, right? But tough for you could be different, right? It could be, I gotta get a dozen of these shoots in a week, right? Someone who works 50 hours a week and makes $7 an hour, that's tough, right? So the question is how do we define what toughness is, right? And for him, he really kind of defined it as doing something that we don't want to do, but what we have to do, right? Doing something what's necessary. Doing the necessary thing is tough. The kids that are here in the library now, right? The ones that'll stay till 12 o'clock at night, that's tough, right? At that point in their life, that's tough, right? So, from him and from my grandparents, that's where really a lot of this came from. Tough guys, tough people, and that's where it all kind of started. Yeah.
And let me get back to the statistics here. Never missed lessons learned in 45 years of running without missing a day. 159,644 miles, 16,436 days, 2,347 weeks, 8 lessons, 1 amazing story. That person out there who has an excuse like I do, I'm like, I'm taking 5 interviews, I can't run today.
Right.
What should they tell them about this book?
I think that, about this book, if I was going to say, well, there's a couple of things. For those of us who have an excuse every day to not work out, or to not take 15 minutes, right, to ourselves, I think what I would say is that there's a handful of things, right, is that as long as it doesn't become chronic, it's not a problem. Things become, when you miss a day, and you have an excuse to miss a day for something, we all understand that. He's a rarity, right? There's not a lot of people like him. But the question is it becomes a problem when it becomes 2 days, or it becomes 3 days, or it becomes 4 days, right? The second thing that I would say is that we tried to make this book, and talk specifically about it, we've tried to make this interactive. And one of the things we try to provide, the questions that you've asked, which is interesting, some of the things that you've asked, and some of the things that I've kind of brought up are questions that we try to ask everyone in the book. And then what we provide to everybody at the end are these questions, along with space where they can answer the questions themselves. Because I think that a lot of books, they want you to read it and they just expect you to be like, well, I read 150 pages and I should be good now, right? But we really want this as an opportunity for people to be reflective, right? I don't think you necessarily see that a lot, especially in running books, right? And a lot of books that tell stories of running are really kind of meant for this small demographic of people who are ultra marathoners, right, or people that run every day. And I think that anybody can relate to this.
Right.
and how we put it together is a way that, like, you know, even though someone hasn't run for 10,000 days in a row, let's say, they deal with struggles, you know, whether it's the loss of a family member, or they deal with the loss of a job, or struggles at the job. So the question isn't necessarily like, how do I have like the greatest career? It's how do I get from one day to the next and be successful in that very next day, right? And we try to provide those kind of lessons. So it's, even though it involves running, like I said before, it's not really about that. It's about how do we get to the next day and succeed every day and give an opportunity for us to be successful every day. And I think that's something that if we think about, okay, like, you know, today was good, but tomorrow can be better, right? And we're like, okay, today was pretty good, so maybe tomorrow can be better. Well, today wasn't as good, so how can we make tomorrow better, right? So that's really what we want to try to do, give the opportunity for someone to ask questions about themselves, and that's a scary thing. You know, that's, when I work with athletes, and when I work with candidates, but especially with athletes because they're a little bit younger, you say, like, well, what do you think about when you're in this certain challenging situation? What are the kind of language that you're using with yourself, right? I'm throwing a ball and pitching and it's failing. What are you thinking about? 99% of them say, I don't know. 2% of them, 1% of them would be like, well, I'm kind of telling myself how bad things are, right? And then when you say, well, really, let's think about that, let's talk about that. There's not a lot of thinking that goes involved with it. There's just a lot of frustration, right? So the question is, in that moment, so what can we do to kind of teach ourselves to get through that particular moment where we're struggling and move on to the next thing? And I think that's really what we've tried to do here, is show that like every day can be successful no matter what you're doing. Sports or athletics or business or politics. So I think that's really what we're trying to provide to everybody, and hopefully we can do, you know, hopefully people are okay with it. And so far the response we've gotten when we've released it online, so far, at least like when we first told everybody it was coming, the response has been really positive, so we're excited.
Well, thank God for that.
Yeah, no kidding. Absolutely, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, never miss co-author Christopher Covert. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, absolutely, thank you so much.
Anytime.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
thank you again.
Yeah.